Hi everyone. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Berry, and I am a co-CEO of digital mobilisation agency Forward Action. My fellow co-lead is Ali Walker-Davis, who also put quite a lot of work into this presentation, but can't be here today because she's learning to drive. So good luck to Ali. We work with organisations across the sector to help them to ensure they're maximising the power of digital to achieve change. And before being at Forward Action, I worked for many years as head of digital mobilisation at Greenpeace UK and was on the programme leadership team there. And before that, I worked at Amnesty UK and Human Rights Watch, and in all of my roles have made great use of engaging networks. So I come here in solidarity with kind of how tough things are at the moment and with the firm belief that together we can make them better. And just as a FYI to you all, this is day 4 of my return from maternity leave. Apologies if I'm a bit wobbly. I'm definitely still trying to get my brain in gear. So with that in mind, I'm afraid I will be reading from notes because I just don't trust my brain to remember anything that I'm going to say, but I will still try and look up sometimes. So before I start, I think it's important to explain how I've thought about the right in preparing for this presentation. I've used quite a broad definition, including in it any forces that basically work against progressive change. So that includes climate deniers, anti-trans activists, anti-LGBT actors, shadowy think tanks, etc., as well as the more conventional far right, who obviously use and piggyback on a lot of these issues as relevant to gain influence. I hope that's okay. It felt in the context of the internet that was quite important to be quite broad, and it felt like the most useful approach. And as that indicates, perhaps this talk has sent me down like a million different rabbit holes. And I think the subject deserves a 3-day summit, not just a half-hour talk. So we'll treat this as a jumping off point, but don't at all think that I think this is a comprehensive review of what we need to be doing. And I really feel like that what this is going to be is the beginning of a conversation, I hope, or many conversations that we'll kind of take from it what is useful and share and go away, test things and share the results with each other. So we're going to travel from the optimism of 2008 to the algorithmic knife fight of 2025 and ask one hard question. How do progressive causes reclaim digital power without abandoning our values? A recent update, which lots of you might have seen from MobLab, showed how the right are learning from one another to build their power globally. So we urgently really need to do the same. So today, what we're going to talk about is celebrating some progressive wins, then a hard reality check, looking inside the machine of the right, and then I'm going to suggest 7 tactics to test and ask some of you to make a 30-day commitment to do so. And then there'll be loads of time for questions at the end, so I hope. So celebrating some wins. Well, I've got 2 buttons to press. Progressives wrote the original digital mobilisation playbook, and we were inspired by the potential of the internet to re-energise voters and supporters to democratise power. It was Obama 2008 and 2012, which set fundraising and micro-organising records, grassroots social movements from uprisings in Syria, Egypt, Libya, and also UK Uncut translated online energy into offline action. And Bernie and Corbyn harnessed the power of digital to organise a new generation of voters, building movements that came close to shifting political history here and in the US. These amazing campaigns taught us the power of big organising, harnessing peer-to-peer trust and the impact of small dollar donors. Remember feeling like we were on the cusp of socialist change rather than precariously balancing on a cliff edge of the hard right? Well, in recent years, with the rapid spread of populism, the rise in misogyny and homophobia online, and the ever-present climate denial, it's all made us feel like progressives have lost the digital strategy race and the internet. But before we get too down, there are some bright spots in progressive digital strategy, which I will talk you through. The first of which I actually feel is no longer a progressive bright spot because of the immigration announcement today and lots of other things that have been going on. But anyway, the Labour 24 was a progressive win, and the campaign's use of programmatic ad buying to reach finely segmented demographics and behavioural profiles showed a digital sophistication to rival the best of the right. It proved contrast to rival parties like Lib Dems, who actually outspent Labour on Meta, but with very little result. Their use of mobile messaging and SMS and WhatsApp drove higher voter turnout that led to the win. And they also used Zoom webinars to help mobilise people on the ground. In the States, we've seen Bernie and AOC collaborating on their Fighting Oligarchy tour, pulling in crowds that are massive crowds. And they have faced criticism for it being a bit of a hollow mobilisation. But behind the scenes, it now seems they've been engaging with hundreds of thousands of RSVPs to organise those people locally and commit to kind of local change. And YouTuber Brian Tyler Cohen has developed Chorus. Oh, a collective of influencers coming together with Democrats to end the far right's domination of online conversation. Early signs show this tactic is at least helping with reach. After Trump's joint address to Congress, Democratic senators' responses to the speech collectively garnered over 87 million views on social media. And another bright spot is the ongoing energy and momentum powered by youth movements. March for Our Lives and Fridays for the Future prove that digitally native organisers can build offline power structures in months, not decades. And a youth-led movement in Brazil called Life Beyond Work began with a viral TikTok video. The leader is now the most voted for left-wing councillor in Rio de Janeiro. And last year, My Life, My Say Here, an amazing youth-led organisation, reached over 4 million 18 to 24-year-olds and motivated nearly 500,000 of them to click through to register to vote. Campaign contributed to record numbers of young people registering to vote in this election and was a real masterclass in understanding your audience. And there will be many great examples of progressive wins in this room today. Many of you run campaigns with shoestring budgets, tight brand guidelines and board oversight. You raise critical funds, shift opinion at the local level and protect communities. So as we have this conversation and we feel really depressed by the way the world is going at the moment, we have to remember that we are really not starting from zero. And these are all good things and we should be really proud of them. But the reality is, despite our best efforts, the internet is an absolute cesspit. It's a breeding ground for the right. We're losing ground on key issues. Rights that we've fought really hard for are at risk or already being eroded. We've seen abortion access challenge, gender recognition. And last year, there were racist riots here, and the recent local elections matched our worst fears around the way that politics are going in this country. Obviously, we had the immigration announcement that just shows the influence of the right now on politics here. And although digital can't be held responsible for all of this, it is definitely playing a role. And that's not just because our tactics aren't working. In 2025, we need to acknowledge that the very structure of the internet and its information is against us in a number of ways. First one of these is money and power. So right-wing parties and climate-wrecking corporations treat digital spend as essential, not discretionary. And we know that that now a lot of the ways in which we used to reach people for free, we have to pay a lot of money to do. We simply cannot match the budgets of the right. In 2022, conservative PACs in the US outsprang progressive counterparts roughly 2 to 1, and similar gaps appear in Europe. And who knows how much J.K. Rowling contributed to the campaign of disinformation about trans folk ahead of the Supreme Court ruling. When it comes to big corporations, we don't have any progressive equivalents using revenue to tout alternative futures. That's down to civil society, to us, and we cannot match their multi-billion-dollar spends. And those campaigns that are being given money to tout misinformation and disinformation probably aren't having to provide a positive ROI on every pound spent. So the right has money on its side, and that money is being spent with less caution. And then there's the platform bias. Multiple studies show that engagement-weighted algorithms amplify right-leaning content. The outrage bias is built in because social media platforms know that outrage drives engagement, and that's what they rely on. Add to that shadow banning of pro-Palestinian and trans-right content, and you have a picture that is very much stacked against us. In the US, Media Matters found substantial right-wing dominance in online media, with right-leaning online shows having nearly 5 times as many followers as left-leaning. And this is very much the model that Reform has been working to replicate in this country, focusing a lot of energy in building online presence, particularly on TikTok, and allegedly freezing out more traditional media. And here, of course, the media skews right anyway, and left-wing outliers like the Canary and Novara Media simply do not have equivalent match. Then there are ethics and our ethical guardrails. Our sector is rightly constrained by charity law, accuracy standards, safeguarding and public trust. That narrows the tactics that we can deploy in ways that counterparts on the right are untroubled by. Obviously, the biggest example of this in this country was Cambridge Analytica. And in India, for example, the digital ID program that they're having there has put a huge amount of citizen data into the hands of the right-wing ruling party and will be used at future elections to kind of basically ensure they win. We know that climate deniers and those fighting to end trans right willfully flood social spaces with coordinated disinformation campaigns, falsely inflating support for climate wrecking and anti-trans initiatives using methods that we never would. And our budget culture is against us too, because most of the time, every pound that we spend on digital ads must show a direct ROI. We underinvest in awareness and persuasion, ceding mindshare to better funded opponents. We don't risk targeting people who don't already agree with us because that wouldn't give us the results the board demands. The right focuses on influence while we focus on engagement. This gives short-term gain, but fails to deliver long-term impact. And it means we tend to speak to people who already agree with us and work towards direct response. So at its heart, the digital strategy for many organisations hasn't moved on significantly from where it was 10 years ago. But the algorithmic environment, audience media diets and content formats have all changed. The right are adjusting, but we cannot win tomorrow's fights with yesterday's strategies. Interestingly, Who Targets Me data suggests that the strategy Labour even used during the general election may now be tired. One big difference in strategy between the parties in the recent elections was that Labour and Conservatives continued to split spending across lots of different entities, individuals' candidate pages, different regions, etc., while Reform put almost all of their spending behind Farage, with the second chunk on Andrea Jenkins, a model that they've also been seeing in Austria. It's early days, but this presidential approach to campaigning could be a good reflection of how to make money go further and connect with more people, and the right are much better at it. Before we get into specific tactics, it's worth highlighting that although the populist right-wingers might have conservative values, they are 100% digital first. They are dominating the internet airwaves. Research in Germany, for example, shows that the online popularity of their right-wing AfD's main candidate far outflanks that of her counterparts, despite her party having much lower membership. So these parties think digital first, and that is helping them gain traction unrivaled by that of more traditional parties. And the impact is pushing everything to the right, as we are seeing really clearly here in the UK. Meanwhile, we're still designing campaigns with digital as an add-on. Neither the technological nor the cultural shift is being factored into our theories of change or our critical pathways. If you take one thing away with you today, this is what it needs to be. Digital needs to shift out of digital teams and be mainstreamed across your organisation. It must become a core part of how we understand the world we're trying to change. Otherwise, we will never catch up. Now let's go through some specific tactics that the right are using. So it's a really obvious one, and it's an old one. Simple, emotive, and polarising messaging. Content engineered for instant cognitive processing performs better online. The average reading age for the UK is 9 to 11. But we overcomplicate issues in a way that the right does not trouble itself with. Simple language, clear villain, vivid imagery, no room for nuance, very little space for brand sign-off. We try to do all these things, but we get ourselves tied up in knots so often. While progressives looking to sell hope and change, studies show that leveraging negative emotions will make content go further. Fear, anger, and disgust outperform hope in shareability tests. So things like this famous Breaking Point poster really deliver. And although Reform are now far more aware of the type of backlash that comes from such clearly racist content, the power of provocation was present, for example, in Andrea Jenkins' winning speech, in which she said that we should house asylum seekers in tents. She knows exactly what she's doing there. She's going to get massive reach for that. Then there are their platform-specific strategies. So from Trump and Farage to Andrew Tate, Graham Linehan and J.K. Rowling, social media has been used extremely successfully by those with nefarious intentions. X was a key platform for Linehan and Rowling to rile up trans hate, and the strategy was to use this platform to disseminate disinformation. With the Musk takeover, it's increasingly a space for right to speak to themselves and organise, with him coming under fire recently for seemingly promoting the right-wing AfD party ahead of Germany's election. But it's TikTok that's really rising up the ranks as the go-to platform to secure influence and spread hate. We saw Trump use it very effectively in the 2024 election with MAGA micro videos, and it has been a key for Reform in the lead up to the recent elections. Despite having an explicit ban on climate disinformation, Global Witness have proved that the site completely fails to act to remove dangerous climate denial, so that's thriving there too. Right-wing campaigns build channel-native teams. Young volunteers post TikToks that never pass through compliance bottlenecks. They exploit features, stitching opponent videos, leveraging trending sounds and live stream reacts to dominate For You feeds. Trump 24 reached 2 billion views on TikTok months before the campaign even officially launched. Slight bright spot, it was also significant in the recent Australia election too, where there was a shock win or a shock defeat for the centre-right party that was campaigning, because Labour spotted that the Liberals, which is the centre-right party there, were making it a key part of their strategy. And so they immediately adopted it as part of theirs, and it's been seen as one of the things that really led to their win. So that's, good. Spotting trends and hijacking hashtags is a key tactic of the right. Activists monitor rival hashtags via social listening dashboards, and then flood with counterframes, diluting the original message. There are so many examples of this happening. Here are just a few. In India in 2019, the right-wing BJP party mobilized people through WhatsApp, on what was still called Twitter, producing hundreds of nationwide trends throughout the election and dominating the online conversation. In Germany, many studies have shown that the far-right AfD has mobilized supporters using hashjacking, which is taking over opponent parties' X-narratives and dominating the platform, with many studies citing this as fundamental to their disproportionate influence on German politics. Israel's cyber unit has long been used to remove pro-Palestine content with 90% compliance rate from platforms. And the climate denying cabal uses troll farms, bots, and real people to respond to relevant news stories and dominate the narrative, generating a false sense of support for polluting initiatives and generally working overtime to help spread disinformation and counter progressive narratives. For example, in Uganda, a network of social accounts, mainly on X, but also on Facebook, coordinated to artificially inflate support for the East Africa Pipeline project and the politicians that supported it. These were fake accounts and fake identities that gave a false impression of the scale of support for the project, providing political legitimacy, choked on my words, for the climate wrecking initiative. And within the context of this information dominance, AI is being used to accelerate the speed with which you can get a message to market. Real-time sentiment analysis and social listening is being used to prompt email copy and targeted SMS within minutes of a news story breaking. Then generative images and videos are used to optimize for organic content and reach to create synthetic authenticity at almost zero cost. These disinformation armies just got even stronger. Then, of course, they are building and buying their own platforms. And the biggest example of this is Musk's takeover of Twitter. And he's shown time and again how control of the infrastructure equals control of conversation rules. Now we have Zuckerberg cozying up to Trump, removing fact checkers, lifting a ban on hate speech, and serving political content on Threads, among other changes that clearly privilege the right. And even if user bases are smaller, such as Truth Social, these walled gardens are key tools for radicalizing and mobilizing without friction or fact checking. It's really saying something when LinkedIn becomes a bastion of progressive values. So what can we take from all of this? These are just some of the key tools in the rights playbook right now, and they're helping them drive dangerous wedges across societies and around the world. What can we do about it? What can we do in response, and how can we beat them at their own game? We've got a few tactics. There are so many more that we could be doing, but this is a start for 10 from me and Ali. So the first is we need to be thinking about how we develop an online media landscape. This is a huge part of what means the right is dominating minds and opinions, massively overinflating the level of influence that they should be having. And with the vast majority of news outlets leaning right and online media being dominated by right populists, we need to build our own infrastructure. This isn't going to work overnight, but if we don't have the platforms for our messages won't count for anything, no matter how well crafted. I want to be really clear, I'm not talking about building our own social media sites, which I think is a terribly bad idea. I think that we want to find creators and work with them, make YouTube shows, produce podcasts, but don't brand them, don't make them about your campaigns. Make them about building an alternative to climate denial, transphobia, racism, homophobia, and all the hateful narratives that continue to dominate. It's hard to build audiences, I know, and we will need to invest time and money. We need to work together to amplify each other's content, and we need to be realistic with our success metrics, accepting that this will be a slow burn. But if we don't start now, we won't ever get there. This is a really easy one, and if you haven't already, build a presence on TikTok and work with creators there to make sure it's relevant. But we need to get used to the fact that TikTok is not going to be amazing for conversion. We need to get comfortable with different success measures. We need to work with creators to get it right and allow ourselves to experiment and resource to be able to adapt to ongoing trends. It won't deliver huge numbers of donors or even necessarily action takers, but over time it will deliver relevance, influence, and impact. Again, I feel like this is one we've been trying to do for a very long time, but still struggle with. So let's start again with how we communicate. We must remind ourselves to respect cognitive load. Simpler narratives with an emotional centre travel further without resorting to scapegoating. We need to be human and connect with people using examples that resonate with their everyday lives. In the context of a cost of living crisis, we need to acknowledge the privilege of campaigning on climate change, for example, and show the ways in which doing so will help people's hard everyday realities. We need to think again, what is the story we are trying to tell? What can people believe in? We need to build compelling narratives and showcase the alternative solutions that we're all fighting for. We need to workshop every campaign message down to a version a 9-year-old could understand and test readability scores. For the right audience, we need to allow communication to trump campaign specificity. We probably don't need to outline the full policy detail to connect people to an issue and then take them onto a journey. We should treat social content like first date conversations. Encourage and celebrate collective care and collective action. Anchor emotion in moral elevation by showing acts of kindness, compassion, and empathy. Research shows that this content can spread and it doesn't require demonization. Show why all of this matters. Pull people out of the neoliberal individualism that is entrenching oppression, but don't use those words because that would be the opposite of what we're doing. Organise your messengers. So one thing that I think we really need to learn from is the success of the disinformation campaigns. We've been shown how flooding social media with a particular viewpoint works, and it isn't inherently unethical. We won't use troll farms or bots that pretend to be people, but we can rally our communities in more systematic ways to respond to dangerous narratives, fledgling news stories, and campaigns of disinformation. This is not about working with influencers. This is about engaging ordinary people and harnessing power of their small networks to create a dominant narrative on social media. Ask them to post on TikTok, Snapchat, WhatsApp, on whatever platforms they're active in. It's like an updated version of relational organising that has the potential to be really powerful. Organise through WhatsApp, share messaging, allow volunteer leaders to horizon scan and flag response moments. Use AI to generate endless variants so that each post is different, but the sentiment is the same. I know many of you may have tried versions of this before. I know that I have. But we're in a new landscape now, and user behaviour has changed. I firmly believe that if we do this in a coordinated way, we will gradually break outside of the bubble and be seen and heard by the mainstream. And we will show those disinformation fiends that we can play them at their own game. Just that we play fair. But of course, there is room for working with influencers, and the first two tactics I talked about will be helped along by working with people who already have platforms and already share progressive narratives. So we need to focus on that too. Again, this is not new, but if you haven't already done it, prioritise building your influencer and content partnership network today. Map creators by audience cause overlap, not by follow account alone. And then once you have your people, provide exclusive briefings and early access to data and tools and treat them as co-authors, not billboards. And where relevant, pay them. Allocate budget for creator-generated content. And don't ask them to share a call to action. Just ask them to share a narrative, and then you can measure incremental reach and persuasion lift. These metrics aren't going to be the ones that we're used to reporting on in the direct response landscape, but this is where we will find our new audiences and start to build momentum to swift the pendulum back. And we need to think laterally about influence. How did the right in America recruit young women? They radicalized them through fitness and dieting communities, inserting themselves into content that was already of interest and slowly seeding their toxic narrative in this space. This is as vile as it is clever, and we need to think about how we can learn from it to beat this dangerous trend. We need to recognize the nuanced ways that the right works, and we need to match them. We need to understand the audiences that we are trying to reach and meet them where they are. What content are people consuming, and how can we be a part of it? Can we explore partnerships? This is something that the My Life, My Say campaign did really well. They partnered with Tinder and Ben & Jerry's and Lime Bikes and loads of other people that they knew that the young people they were trying to reach were listening to, and it meant that they mobilised a far bigger and more diverse range of young people than they otherwise would have done. So let's think about how we can use sites like Tinder, Spotify, Nextdoor, Vinted, etc. to reach people and grow our influence. And we need to rethink how we put pressure on decision makers too. For too long, we've directly targeted them, but this now achieves very little. Whereas a petition with 1 million signatures used to mean something, the holders of power have become so used to staring them down. There's still value, obviously, in scale of this kind. It helps to build our communities and enables us to take people on a journey to impact. But that impact is rarely as direct anymore of target this decision maker and they will change their mind. Instead, we need to think differently about influence. We need to get smarter with our theories of change, and we need to think laterally about how we influence our campaign targets. For example, let's direct our people power at corporates who have more precarious brands and huge influence over the government. Encourage them to change, and the government will then need to change too. And we need to invest in shifting opinions. Can't emphasize this enough. We need to place value and put money behind influence, not just engagement. And what I mean by that is creating content that is not brand content and is not a call to action, but is informational and narrative building, and put money behind it to get in front of the right people using smart programmatic advertising. Think about what would happen if you ring-fenced at least 10% of your digital budget on this kind of persuasion. Obviously, I'm CEO of a digital mobilization agency, and I obviously believe in that model and in reaching people who share your values and build your community and grow the movement for change and all of the tactics that have been talked about at this conference. But I think if we are going to learn from the right, one key lesson we must take home today is that we do need to start thinking beyond direct calls to action and immediate ROI. The key thing we need to add to our toolkit is the ability to think about and use digital to influence, to attract those who are close to us but not yet there. And we can only do this by building persuasive narratives and putting them in front of those who are undecided, using smart programmatic advertising that allows us to serve the right message to the right audience at the right time, expecting nothing more from them than to read or watch and listen, to gradually working together, and over time we can build a counter-argument to build the support for alternative futures. This is not an either-or situation. If we're to beat the budgets and media influence, we need to be doing both, building our communities and also trying to gradually bring a wider number of people alongside us. And the final thing, which connects to this as well, is targeting smarter and listening constantly. So to spend this budget well, we need to ensure we're using data effectively. While much of the content from the right-wing orgs looks pretty shonky, the data and analytics that sit behind it are significantly more sophisticated. We know that they identify persuadable clusters and use social listening to inform the content that will work for them. And we need to do that too. Understanding where people are and the language they are speaking and using this to inform the content that we create will be key to shifting the dial towards progressive change. We need to pair this with the programmatic ad buying I just talked about, and we'll have a winning combination. We should also be exploring about how AI can be used ethically to help with this, if indeed we believe it can be used ethically at all. But it could help to analyse daily shifts in relevant conversations and recommend content pivots, generate content that we can use to allow us to test and learn at scale, and create GPTs for winning formulas that we can share with grassroots organisations to help save time and money. So that is our shortened list of things we should be trying. And on reflection, I think it really leads back to one meta tactic, which is to lean into this narrative war. We cannot beat the right with the people who already agree with us and have the propensity to act. We need to share a compelling vision for an alternative future and get people to believe in it too. Initially, we need to ask nothing more of them than to listen and to reflect. And over time, we can bring them on a journey to expanding support for progressive change and increasing the political mandate for action. So I'm going to give you 5 minutes to make a commitment to yourself, thinking about these tactics or others that have come into your head, or things that you've maybe tried and dropped or doing anything like that. Make a commitment to yourself to try it in the next 30 days. Write it down. So write down the tactic, think about how you're going to measure its success, and a deadline to yourself. And I would ask you that once you have done it, make sure you share your results back with this community here so that we can all learn from those things. So I'll end by saying what I think we already know. Digital space is not neutral. If we do not shape it intentionally, others will shape it for us. Together we can make progressive change the mainstream standard and put the right back in the margins where it belongs. So before I disappear off to organise that 3-day summit, which genuinely I think we need to do any of you have any questions for me?
Sarah, a few feedback, best session of the conference, so kudos to that.
Thanks.
First one on the list, building our own media infrastructure would require a large amount of investment to compete with the right. Where do you think this investment of this scale would come from? Yes.
Well, I wasn't thinking that yes, okay, there is a way that you could do it that would require a huge amount of investment. And I think there are things that could be explored around. There are definitely certain sort of major donors in the progressive space that we could create a compelling case to get money from them in order to do it. But I was thinking more that if we all work together, like creating a YouTube show doesn't actually need to cost that much money. I think the way that a lot of people in civil society have tried to do it before is has been too connected to specific campaigns or to specific asks. But if we think about just within the context, it's more about an organisation providing internal resource and being willing to create and invest time in producing that kind of content that isn't directly relating to a specific campaign, but is more about kind of recognising the need to be winning this narrative war, or working with and approaching existing YouTubers or other creators to work with them to do it. But I suppose if we were looking along the kind of big budget thing, then I think it probably is a major donor opportunity, I should say. And I think the current climate that we are in does raise opportunities there, because it is a very scary time for a lot of people. And there's a compelling argument to be trying different tactics, because at the moment we are losing. And so being able to build that case and put it in front of a major donor, I think would be the way that I would suggest that money.
Okay, there's just one request that one of the audience, or the audience, would like you to share the script, if possible, that you read from, because they'd love to share that with others. So clearly that message is going to take on a life of its own. Next question is, do you think the differences are left versus right, or mainstream versus alternative/insurgent?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that what do I think? I think that left and right, I think both left and right are minority opinions. And I think there is a massive swathe of people in the middle who don't really sit in either side. And at the moment, the right, through their dominance of the internet, is really overinflating their influence. And it's being represented in the ballot box, because they're persuading that kind of like sort of mainstream opinion that is the way that they need to be thinking. And so sorry, repeat the questions. It was about
Let's go down to the bottom now. Here we go. Do you think the differences are left versus right, or mainstream versus alternative/insurgent?
Yes. So no, I think that alternative/insurgent, no, I don't think those are the differences. So I think it isn't left or right, and I don't think it's mainstream insurgent. I think what it is that, are they the differences? Sorry, I'm just trying to explain what I'm trying to say. Is that I think, basically what I think there actually is left, right and centre. And what the vast majority of people are is centre. And at the moment we are very much swaying centre-right, because of the overinflation of the right in the internet, and they're having a massive influence. I don't love the centre. I'm not a centrist. I personally am on the left. But I think that we haven't got an insurgent left. Oh God, sorry, I'm not. So yes, there is definitely, the optimist in me thinks that there is a difference between kind of, okay, I'm really bad. Right, no, so it's not mainstream and insurgent, it's status quo and insurgent. And I don't think those two things are the same. That's, I think, where I'm getting at. So I think the mainstream, most people in the mainstream aren't, their views and opinions aren't necessarily represented by politics, I think is the big thing. And so what the right are getting right is that they are starting to show them opinions that they are suggesting are felt by more people than are, and that's bringing people towards a political standpoint on the basis of the lives that they're living and the realities that they're experiencing. And I think that what we need to do is show a more left-leaning version of that. And the optimist in me feels like we've got in this country sort of 4 years to build that alternative, because I do think that what people really want is change. And in that sense, I think that it is the alternative that is kind of the difference. But I don't think the opposite of that is mainstream, if that makes sense. It's just the status quo, which I don't actually think is mainstream, if that makes any sense.
Well, actually, this
articulating myself well.
Shows how challenging the landscape is. You mentioned the issue of our message only reaching those who already agree with us. Should we rethink audiences if that's the case?
Yeah, I don't think we want to stop talking to people who agree with us. And I think there are still loads of people who agree with us we're not necessarily talking to. So we need to continue to try to broaden our communication with people who share our values and bring them into our organisations. That is work that absolutely needs to carry on, and building the movement and growing the movement. I think we also separately need to be doing this very smart targeting of people that actually, this is where I'm talking about the mainstream, as it were. I think the vast majority of people aren't necessarily engaging in these conversations at all. And where they are engaging with them, the only ones that they're seeing are the right-wing arguments because they are flooding the internet with them. So what we need to be doing is working out who those people are and working out where they are and working out how to talk to them and persuade them of our opinion. And so, yes, I think we need to be doing both.
This question is about passing on the influence internally. We have loads of questions. Hopefully we'll get to most of them. Really useful session. We are focused on narrative change and wondered how, if you have any advice on how to get senior leaders, corporate partners, etc., on board when there are less clear, big question, less clear-cut measures to demonstrate success to them.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's the state of the world that is the way what we need to use to persuade them, because we are not winning and we are really on the cusp of quite drastic negative change in this country. We're seeing the influence of the right and the way that it's affecting, like its immediate effect on politics in this country and the lives of people. And it's making the lives of people on the margins even worse than they are already. And so the compelling argument, I think, is that whatever we're doing right now isn't working, or it's not working well enough. And we need to listen and look at what the right have been doing. And this isn't new. They've been building towards this for decades. Now it's in the internet, but previously it was about sort of media. And so we need to invest in that too. And I think it comes back to making that argument about we need to compare the way that we think about how we spend money versus how the right thinks about how they spend money, and learn to invest in the same things for them where we don't have the same metrics, and find metrics that we do feel comfortable with. There's obviously things that you can do around opinion tracking and kind of sentiment tracking and things that can help boards and senior leaders feel like they're seeing some change as a result of investing in things. But it will not be as quick as a conversion in terms of like someone signing a petition or something. So yeah, it won't be the same kind of ROI, but I think that first of all, it's making a compelling case around we are losing this. This is what the opposition is doing. This is what we need to invest in doing. And these are the ways in which we can shift the way we think about success if we're attempting to invest in those things.
Question about hijacking, some concerns around hijacking hashtags. How do you ensure hijacking the far right hashtags don't fuel their posts and give them more visibility?
Yeah, I don't think we necessarily hijack far right hashtags. I think it's that we look at what they do is it's like trending hashtags or hashtags that are news stories more generally. And the right will be hijacking that with their narratives around it. And we need to be also hijacking it with our narratives around it. So they do hijack opposition parties' hashtags and things, but I think that we wouldn't necessarily do that. But I do think if it's just a hashtag, I don't think we're amplifying if we're just doing a hashtag, it's not amplifying their message, because what that means is that when someone clicks on that hashtag, they're seeing way more of the progressive narrative around that issue than they are the right narrative around that issue. And that's the whole point. And that's why it works for them, because that means that if anyone goes, so in relation to that pipeline that I talked about, it meant that if anyone was looking on Facebook or X for information about that pipeline, what they would find was just loads and loads and loads of content that was supporting it. Whereas actually that was massively overinflating the level of support that existed. So if we had done the opposite and used that hashtag and put loads of stuff that was opposing it, then that would be what people would see when they saw the hashtag. So I don't think it necessarily supports the alternative argument.
And do you have any suggestions for engaging older audiences rather than those who are highly on TikTok or YouTube?
Well, I mean, Reform really use Meta, right? It's like Facebook is the one for older audiences. And I think one of the things that's really concerning about slightly older audiences is the way in which kind of deep fakes and things like that are being used to target them, because they're less familiar with that as a technology and are far more convinced by it. So I think Facebook is the place to engage older audiences, and Instagram, actually, to be fair. And I think that it's the same tactic. It's just making sure that we're putting content in those platforms that are, there's a whole thing about how with disinformation, you don't want to engage with the right's narrative and disprove it. That's not what we want to do. We just want to choose what is our story that we want to tell and get it out into those spaces, and pay to put it in front of those people at important times. And when there are conversations happening around things, just making sure that our narrative is there front and center to be seen by them.
Okay, and the last two questions we'll have here are interesting questions. The first one is, collaboration is great, but how do we get progressives to play nice with each other?
Yeah, this was actually something that I was going to put in here, because one of the things that I think was really stark about the anti-trans movement is the fact that it is a movement. It is a coming together of sort of three quite different entities working together, not as a coalition, but as a movement. And they've done that very, very successfully, because they just agreed on an outcome that they wanted to see. And they didn't agree on the different arguments to get there, right? But they just agreed on the outcome that they wanted to see. And in a way, like, we're meant to be the people that are good at movements, but I felt like actually in that instance, the right really showed us that they've done it a bit better in this instance, or they've certainly had an outcome that they wanted to see. So I think it is about doing things like, I'm sort of only half joking about the 3-day summit. Honestly, I do think it is about events like this, people coming together in environments to like actually plan and strategize. And I think one thing that we do on the progressive side too often is that we always default to a coalition, and we think that if we're going to work together, it needs to be in a coalition. And then we start to fight over messaging and ideas and targets and how we're going to achieve change. Whereas instead, what we actually want to do is work together as a movement and understand each other's strengths and weaknesses and what it is that we kind of collectively want to achieve, and empowering each other to go off and do that in our different ways. And so I do think lots more kind of cross-movement meetups, where we think about what those strengths and weaknesses are, and we commit to kind of, playing nice, and seeing each other as allies and people that will help us get to a place that we want to be, rather than hinder us doing that, will be the way forward. And there are organisations obviously doing that, like Neon are amazing at doing lots of movement building, but I think we need to do more of it. And they very much focus on grassroots, and I think we need to do it also more with like more established organisations.
Okay. The last question is kind of a fitting last question, really, because it is the future. And as you've been talking so extensively about using technology and digital, it's of course around AI. AI has been mentioned a few times in your manifesto. Is there a way to do this ethically? And this is a big question. Particularly with a considerable negative impact that things like ChatGPT have on the environment, as well as other ethical concerns. A lot to balance up there. Conflicting goals.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, if you are concerned about the environment, there is not an ethical way to use AI, right? There isn't some kind of like eco-friendly version of AI. And also we all know that it is inherently racist, and there's lots of massive ethical problems with using AI. I suppose, so for me, there's no way of using AI ethically. I think what might be sort of like a different question that I would ask myself is, what does not using AI mean in the grander scheme of things? So if I don't use AI to power my progressive campaigns and to power the progressive movement, ultimately, is the outcome for the planet worse than if I were to use AI? And for me, the balance comes out on no. Like, we need to be using the same technology that the right are using, otherwise we are never going to be able to beat them. And if we, it's another sort of way in which the right, the left, or progressives constantly hold themselves back because of our ethics. And I agree with those ethics, but in this instance, I just think we will be shooting ourselves in the foot because we just so quickly lose ground. And ultimately, everything that we're standing against will just happen in a worse way anyway and accelerate. So we sort of need to just, I think, swallow that a little bit, but be aware of it, and definitely in terms of its bias, be really aware of it, and make sure that we're kind of changing things and looking at what it spits out. But yeah, that would be what my take on that, which is not great.
Well, thank you, Barry. And I think this has been one of the most insightful, inspiring and thought-provoking talks of the ENCC. So really give it up for Barry. Amazing.
Thanks very much. Thanks, everyone.